from the glass collapsing on top of him. He throws the knife on the floor and he reaches down and gets the gun just about to head level, and I see it, of course, and I open fire. Fired 2 rounds. Um, my first round actually hit him in the arm, straight through his arm bone, into his heart, and then collapsed down below his heart. And then the second round actually went into the door of the car, and I got some grief for that one too, which is another part of the ending story. And so that's where the fear started to really kick in, because now I've just opened fire on this guy, right, and he slumps over on the front seat of this bench seat car.
Hi, everybody. This is Christina and Daniel Deffenbaugh with 1042 Project, and welcome to episode 12 of the Shared Voices podcast. I'm so excited to have you guys with us today. We've got our great friend Chris Hoyer with us, and I'll let him introduce who he is and what he's up to, but I'm really looking forward to sharing this conversation with you. So, Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Cool. Thank you, man. Thanks for the
Yeah.
invite too, by the way. I know we've had some trouble in the past, but I think we're past all that.
Man, I'm telling you, just for our listeners, we've had a lot of technical difficulties the last week and a half or so. So thank you for being patient with us.
Yeah.
Oh,
And we tried to set this up with you for a little bit, and I apologize for that. But
It's
hey,
been a deal.
it's
I
been a
think
deal. But
it was my issue with my own computer. So you guys can point the finger at me. That's okay. I'm used to it. So,
hey, we got through it though. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
so I'm a retired Phoenix police officer. Got hired on '97, retired 2018, and believe it or not, I actually moved to San Diego not long after that, and living the best life ever now, living on the beach and traveling a lot, speaking and sharing my presentation across the country, and living the best life ever. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell for now.
Love that.
That's
I
awesome,
love
man.
that.
I I got into this back in 2020. I don't even know what to call this field that we're in, this ministry that we're in, and you were one of the first people that I found online when I first started to try to find like-minded people and try to find people that would understand me.
Mm-hmm.
You were one of the first ones, and I've been creepily following you for a while. So
He's been stalking you,
yeah,
internet stalking you.
if you saw the bushes moving outside, that could have been me.
I love it, man. I love it. It's an honor to be here. Actually, I think you guys are just terrific. So
Absolutely,
Thank you.
and we're in Iowa, man, and you're on the beach in San Diego. Like, this isn't fair. Let's be real.
We're finally getting some of the nice weather that I think you get to just live with.
Yeah.
it's
So,
it's rough, man. I'm not gonna lie. Although it's been kind of cold and a little bit rainy here in the last few days, but
Oh.
we tough it out somehow, you know. So.
you poor guy.
Man, we just now got it to where here in Iowa we can go outside and it doesn't hurt our skin.
Oh,
It's
Yeah.
for the last week and a half or so, it's been 60s, 70s. Today it got into the 80s.
oh, nice, nice.
And yeah, so that's why my legs are all nice and white.
Yeah, well,
We
don't forget. I mean, 30 years in the desert, you know, at 140 degrees outside. So I've suffered through all that. So now, you know,
you deserve it.
it's a rough 63 on average, pretty much, which is just about perfect for here. So
Yeah, it is. You guys are out in the Encinitas area?
yeah, so North County,
Beautiful.
coastal San Diego, basically for people that don't know. So
Yeah, that's a beautiful area. I used to live not too far from there in San Marcos
oh,
when
yeah.
I was younger, in my younger days. So I'm very familiar with that area. Luckily, I had a chance to go back and visit a couple times, and it's a beautiful area. I'm glad you get to enjoy it every day with your beautiful.
You guys already heard it before. Open door anytime. Come on out. So
Yeah, we're packing our bags as soon as we get done here. And
Oh man, I
we
wish.
we actually we do plan on coming out to that area to meet with you and some of the other people we've gotten to meet.
Yeah.
Seems like a lot of you have gone out to the West Coast and near that Pacific Ocean, and
yeah,
so I think we need to come and visit some people out there.
Mm-hmm.
cool.
But for sure. So yeah, um, this book you wrote, man. Let's jump right into this book. You got it sitting right here. When that day comes, um, I read it. There's an audio book, just so people know too. There's the physical book, obviously that Chris was nice enough to send to me and signed it for me.
Yes, that was so nice. Thank you.
Thank you. And I also got Natalie's book, and I love that. I got that one right here as well.
Oh yeah.
His better half has also written a book,
True
and I
rock
have them
star,
both.
yes. So,
What's that?
the true rock star here. So
Uh,
Somebody's got to be the bass player, Chris.
exactly. Yeah.
But man, your book. First of all, I know I've told you this over the phone, but whenever first responders like you who have lived the life and have gone through the stuff I've been through, when I see that you guys that you had the courage to sit down and write a book, and that inspires me, Chris. So I'm constantly looking for books to read, especially from first responders, and reading yours was pretty cool. As you know, I also, besides having PTSD, I also have ADHD. So reading can be really tough to stay focused on reading. So I do a lot of audiobooks. And I was so happy to find your book on audiobook. So thank you for that, because I got to listen to it. Got through it pretty quick, actually.
yeah, your book I want to mention is one that I heard about right away, and I heard a lot about it. Daniel is very, very quick to just share like, oh my gosh, this book is amazing. So well done.
It is. And in the book, when everybody buys the book, because I know everybody's going to go out and buy it because they should. Man, your journey, what I like about it is your journey. And your journey starts when you were a kid. And a lot of the stuff I've learned that I'm struggling with to this day, that I've been getting to work with over the last couple of years, have been dealing with my childhood. I never realized how much, until I started getting therapy and getting help, how much of how we act day to day, a lot of that is carried on through life, clear back to our childhood. The difficulties we had, maybe how we were treated. As a little kid, you're throwing out actions, and there's always going to be a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And the reaction a lot of times may not be good, depending on how you were raised or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And can really beat you down mentally. And when I read your book, man, I was able to relate with you about your childhood and some of the struggles you went through. Not nearly as much as you did. But I love that you added that part to your book, because a lot of people want to get right to the end, get to that part. But so much of it begins when we're kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you address that in your book. So because in your book, you talk about this, and this is something I deal with, is I don't ever feel smart. I feel dumb. I was never a good student. I'm bad at writing. I'm bad at speaking.
A
So
lot
of
of
course,
self-doubt.
right. So of course, we're bad at speaking. Why not start a podcast, right? Whatever.
Yeah,
we
makes
do,
sense.
We do what God calls us to do. No, I'm losing my train of thought. Sorry. I know you're wanting to.
You were saying that you can relate to a lot of what he shared, and then you were talking about the self.
So anyway, in your book, you talk about how you kind of felt like that way too. Like, I mean, your childhood wasn't easy. Getting through high school was tough. You mind sharing a little bit of that, and we'll just kind of start right there, because I think it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it's kind of funny you say that because Natalie's poking her head up over my computer because I did not want to put that part of the book in there. And she
Oh.
insisted, she goes, people need to know where you came from and stuff. And I said, I don't really want to share that part of my life with the public.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of battled back and forth for several weeks on it. And I kept saying, no, no, no. And she's like, look, you're going to do this eventually. And I'm like, whatever. So, and sure enough, and I very quickly figured out that whatever Natalie wants, you fill in the blanks from there. So I did. I wrote that part of it, and I'm not gonna lie, it was very reluctantly. I'm like, no, 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 and I just did it just because I felt like, okay, well, she's the professional. Okay, I'm gonna do it. And the first version, if you will, I looked at it and I deleted the whole thing. I said no. If I had it in on like paper, I would have balled it up and thrown it in the garbage, but I didn't. So
Wow.
deleted the whole thing. Came back about 2 weeks later, and for some reason just got inspired and wrote it. And as it turned out, looking back on it, that's actually one of the better stories in the book. And I had no idea it was gonna lead me down that path, which I now figured out was very much like you. It was like the path to healing, and
Mm-hmm.
getting a lot of that stuff out there and in the open, so to speak, was the exact same reason why the rest of the book was written. So, of course, I
Wow.
didn't know that at the time when I was actually writing it. When I started
Right.
writing it, it was more just because I knew that I had to release all that stuff off my chest, and talking about it wasn't enough. So writing it was the best thing I ever did, as it turned out. Natalie says all the time that book saved my life. So
Wow.
Man, I love that. Was that when you were writing down your childhood stuff? The reason why I'm asking is because I go to counseling once a week. I just left my therapy appointment here a little bit ago, so it's fresh on my mind. And when we're in there, we talk a lot about my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And what I didn't realize, Chris, is how much what can happen as a child or the lies that were told as a kid hold you down throughout your life. But then when you're able to go back to your childhood with healthy adult eyes and go back, mentally and kind of revisit your childhood, um, you're able to do so in a way that is safe and healthy. And when you can go back in a safe and healthy eyes and see your childhood and see where hurt was damaged and notice where that damage changed you, and if you can go back and just address that, and it's not easy, but go back and address it, it's almost like it unlocks a chain throughout your life. It doesn't just help the healing process for when you were a child, it helps the healing process to today. You almost see when you can replace that lie, whether it be a lie about your identity, maybe from a father or something that, doesn't have any love towards you,
Mm-hmm.
is kind of like a roommate, kind of like Chris's story.
Yeah, I wasn't an unhappy kid for the most part, but I didn't have the kind of life that I thought that I wanted, if you will. My goal as as a little kid, even back as long as I can remember, was I wanted to live at the beach and just ride my bike every day. And as it turned out, you know, long story short, basically got a father who I've never met. He was Marine Corps Force Recon, um, Vietnam veteran, and was deployed probably somewhere around the time I was, right before I was born. Apparently, I don't know. My mom can't really remember, unfortunately, because of the age of Aquarius and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm searching for him still, and then introduce stepdad, who comes into the picture for about 2 years, and they break up and get divorced, and then she meets another guy who ends up being emotionally, yeah, pretty rough guy on her and I, physically her, emotionally with me, and moved us out of state. And so then when I was 14, my mom kicks me out of the house, go live back with stepdad, and at 18, stepdad kicks me out of the house, and then I'm homeless, drop out of school. And just side note to that whole thing, now this is high school number 4 that I'm now attending, and I'm now a senior, of course. Get kicked out in the middle of a snowstorm, get sent, down my little path. And I was living in my car for a while, went back to Virginia where my mom still was, found my way, got back on my feet. And after that, everything started to kind of work out. And fast forward, met a girl, moved to Arizona. And not long after that, she freaking jumped ship after like several weeks that we've been living out there. So I started looking back, going, "Well, a second. Well, I got my real father, who I don't know anything about. So then I got my stepdad, who basically bails, and then my mom kicks me out of the house. Stepdad kicks me out of the house. Girlfriend moves me across the country, and then she bails on me. So having some of these underlying abandonment issues, you would think were probably right up in the forefront of my mind.
Wow.
Yeah.
And,
Wow.
to be honest with you, that really wasn't it. But I have a great story that if you guys want to hear it, about how I had been hanging on to my childhood, one of my major childhood events for whatever it was, since 1987, and got guided through with another private company, and I can endorse those guys if you want me to. And
Yeah.
it was unbelievable. So Dan with 22-0, if you guys have heard of those guys,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
called them up, and I basically, so side note, a lot of what I do is a public speaking and presentations for my career, my critical incidents that I survived. So I was reaching out to Dan and his people, and I said, "Hey, what I'd like to do is just add you guys to my presentation as a resource for other folks to join in on, because I've heard a lot of really good things about them." And they insisted, they're like, "Oh yeah, of course, please, yeah. Hey, by the way, do you want to do a session with us?" And I'm like, "Nah, dude, I'm good, man. I'm 100%. I'm retired. I don't need any of that crap, right?" So I'm doing the thing I've been doing my entire life, especially as a cop, And I'm like, "Nah, dude, I'm good." It's like, well, it's free for law enforcement, by the way. Little endorsement there. She goes, yeah, just give it a shot. All right, fine, whatever. So I call her up and I do this, like, it's probably like 8 or 10, 15 questions, whatever it is. Nothing really life pressing. What are some of your stressors? Do you stress about sleep? Do you stress about money? Do you stress about your relationship and all this kind of stuff? And I scored really well and really low, if you will, on the numbers. So my scores came in at like between 1 and 3 for every question they asked me. Okay.
Oh, wow.
So fast forward about a week or so later, Dan calls me personally. He's the owner of the company, and he's Special Forces Navy guy, just a stud, like 10 times over. Calls me up and got me on the phone, and I'm thinking, I'm a pretty sharp guy. I kind of know the direction he's going with this whole thing. He's asking me certain questions. He goes, okay, let's go back to your childhood when you're 18, the day that your dad kicked you out of the house. Okay, whatever. And Natalie had been saying for a while, she's like, I think you're kind of hanging on to that. I said, no, you don't know what you're talking about. Whatever. No, I'm fine. It's been almost 4 decades that this thing happened. So, I mean, I'm like, whatever. So he gets in there. He goes, okay, what I want you to do is like picture yourself as like a balloon or a drone or something like that. And I'm going, okay, whatever. So I'm thinking, what is this thing going to be? So he goes, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to picture yourself over your dad's house, right? And I'm going, okay. He goes, put it in your mind that you're there the day of, and you can picture yourself walking out the front door, because I describe it in great detail. I walked in my car, loaded up a bunch of stuff, came back, a couple bags of groceries waiting for me. I left, and off I go into the snow. He goes, now picture that. He goes, now shift gears. He goes, now try to find the biggest box you can find. I'm like, okay, in your mind, of course. Okay, so I find this huge box, whatever, like a refrigerator box or whatever. He goes, now take all that grief and all that trauma from your father and put it in that box. I'm thinking, and again, I'm thinking, I teach this kind of stuff. I know where he's going. Yeah, whatever. And I'm okay. I'll do it for you because whatever. So I pack all this. I'm now getting like angry. I'm like, yeah, because I'm remembering all these things. And don't get me wrong, I did not have a bad childhood with either of my two parents. It was pretty productive for the most part. But the fact is, yeah, they kicked me out of the house, both times in my teenage years. And so I'm packing all the stuff in this box. I'm like, oh, whatever. So then he goes, well, find like a tape gun or something like that. And he goes, now tape that box up. Okay, and I'm thinking we're gonna be done right now. I've taped it up, and now it's all compressed or whatever else. So I'm up there in my mind, and I'm like, yeah, I'm taping the shit out of this box, and whatever. And then he goes, all right, now find in your mind again the biggest bow you can find. And I'm like, yeah. So I'm in my brain, I'm picturing this giant red bow, right? This huge thing. He goes, now take that box and hand it back to your father. And I'm like, I freaking lost it. I'm like, oh my, right. So he goes, that's all for him to hold on to. That's not for you. And I'm like, oh my goodness.
Wow.
37 years of trauma, if you will, or just hanging on to that grief from way back then when I was 18. Now it's just gone. Dude, I slept like a freaking baby for the first time after that. I mean,
Wow.
unbelievable. So yeah.
I love that.
And that's a great story, man. So that's not one
amazing.
because that just happened recently. So
We actually talked about that in therapy today. That's kind of creepy.
Did you really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Similar to that. That's wild.
And that night, you said that night you slept better.
Oh yeah, no, I was just. It was almost like the toxins released from my entire body. It was unbelievable.
Wow.
So, pretty cool.
Man, that's awesome.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I share that story because it's a very, very simple way to look at your life and just say, hey, is this for me to hang on to, or is this for somebody else that put it on me? And when I put it back on him, it was like, oh yeah, this isn't something that I created on my own. I had to serve it, and regardless of the circumstances, basically the reason why I got kicked out of the house is because I wasn't able or willing to pay rent to live at home. And I'm like,
wow,
I'm a child, come on.
right.
I wasn't prepared for that level of responsibility at that age. I just wasn't, and I was working full time, 40 hours a week, and I was going to school full time. and it was just too much for me to handle. It just was. And I'm like, wait a second, I'm barely making enough money just to pay my own insurance and my own car payment, and I got to buy my own clothes, and you want to pay rent on top of all that too. I'm breaking my neck.
Wow.
And what could have happened was, hey, you know what, we're struggling with money right now. Can you help us out just by contributing to the household? But that's not how it was. It was like, hey,
Right.
you got to pay.
So you
Okay.
carried the weight of what you carried the weight of what he did to you, pretty much your whole life.
Yeah. Okay. So, but
And we were just talking about that with our chaplain too, about carrying other people's sins.
Yeah.
Where people have done stuff to us, and then especially first responders, we do it. We may go to an assault of a domestic abuse victim, and the woman say stabbed or something, and you think, had I just been there 2 minutes earlier, if I'd have been on the other side of town, I would have got there closer. Maybe I could have got there before he stabbed her. And instead of letting that guy live with what he did, we put that weight and we carry that onto us, that she died because of us, if we would have got there in time. But in reality, that's not real.
Right.
That person chose to do what he did to her, and that's the fact. But yet, as first responders, just like a child, 18-year-old child, we try to carry that.
Yeah.
And I know, at least for me anyway, and I know from reading your book, there's plenty of times throughout your career, Chris, where you probably had to deal with that.
oh yeah,
And
I mean, on a semi-regular basis, and I talk a little bit about, even if you were there, could you have stopped it? And if you were in a situation where you did show up and he was coming at her with a knife, and now you've got to take a life, that's a whole nother level of guilt, on some way that you might have to process through. It's like, oh, and if he doesn't, I mean, I hate to say it this way, if he doesn't kill her, then there's a high probability he's going to come back and do it when you're not there. So, if you don't have an opportunity just to stop the threat completely, and he ends up going to jail, he's going to get out at some point, more than likely, and he's going to
did you
probably come back and try again. So,
did you struggle with that during your career of carrying that? I know.
a little bit, mostly is because as well as I do, it's really, it sounds kind of bad to say it this way. It's less about the citizens and more about cops and kids. Anytime I saw a kid get hurt or another officer get hurt, that's where it dug, deep into the heart.
Right.
Because citizens, yeah, I mean, yeah, they can truly be victims as well. However, more often than not, they've got an opportunity to step away from that if they can. For the ones that really really can't, yeah, those dug and wore on me pretty good. But it's like, I understand that you're in a domestic situation and you feel like you can't get out for this long list of reasons, but you have a car, you're an adult. What's to stop you from just saying, you know what, I'm gonna go in there and put $100 worth of gas in my car and just drive as far as I can. That's
Mhm.
escape. Is it practical? Not necessarily. No, it's not. But you're still
Right.
escaping what's way worse over here. What this is. You don't know what this is. I'd much rather go with the unknown, the scarier stuff, than going back
Yeah.
to what I know is, detrimental to my life. So
Yeah.
Yeah. So you when you drop out of high school, you end up eventually finishing high school, correct?
yes,
Okay.
for the most part,
Eh,
yeah, I did. I got my GED. Yeah.
yeah. Well, hey,
Yeah.
that's all right, because I
Yeah,
like
that
this
counts.
part of the story, because so if you don't mind, so that happens, and then tell me about your entrepreneur spirit that took place.
Well, as it turned out, I had a roommate at the time who was a carpet installer, and he kept telling me, "Hey, man, you got to join up. It's really good work. It's steady, blah blah blah." So I started doing it on the side a little bit, and I actually, as it turned out, I was really good at it. Who knew, right?
Mm.
Um, so fast
So
forward, I get done with my apprenticeship. I go work for another guy for a while, and decide that, I mean, I can probably do this better on my own, especially after I heard my boss at the time. He goes, "Okay, go down the street. There's a lady that needs some repair on her carpet." He goes, "Whatever you gotta do, cut the hole out, fix it's like a cigarette hole burn, whatever else, and charge her $60." And I'm like, $60? I go, "That's gonna take 5 minutes." He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "And if I had to put my key in my truck, it'd be $75." So of course you gotta remember this was back in like 1992, 93. So uh, it was
back,
pretty good money back then, yeah.
yeah, back
But
then,
my
yeah.
was, okay, well, if I do that 4 or 5 times or 10 times a day, I mean, I can make a living at that. So that's exactly what I did, and actually did quite well. Was able to support a young family, taking vacations, bought a couple of brand new cars off this whole thing. I was like, wow, this is actually working out pretty good. Unfortunately, it didn't take me long to figure out that, yeah, rolling around on the floor at 40 years old does not sound that appealing to me. You know what I mean? Especially when you got to deal with some of the stuff you got to deal with. I mean, 25 years of carpet on the floor, you can only imagine what that looks like and have to process through that whole thing. So
Yeah. So
I
you
was
leave
doing it.
high school, you get your GED, you become a carpet layer, and then all of a sudden you're wearing a badge. How's that happen?
Well, oddly enough, I got called by this guy, and he goes, "Hey, can you come out to my house? And just got some issue going on in my entryway. Get out there." Cool, sure enough. Well, it turned out that another agency had gone in there and thrown a flashbang in the front door and burned up the entryway in the carpet. I didn't
Oh,
even, I had no. He's telling me what it was. I'm like, I don't even know what a flashbang is. I have no idea what he was even talking about. But turned out he was a Phoenix police sergeant at the time.
oh.
So we get done doing the whole thing, and during the whole thing, he was like, "Hey, where's your boss?" And I go, "What do you mean? I am the boss." He goes, "You got all these guys that are like 40 years old working for you." He goes, "How old are you?" I'm like, "I was 26, I think, at the time." And he made the comment that just literally changed my life. He goes, "You're a great individual. You ever thought about being a cop?" And I'm like, "Okay." So that's literally all.
Wow.
And so
Had you have thought about it by then? Had you have thought about it growing up at all?
I had actually at the time talked to my now ex-wife, by the way, which watch out for those lightning bolts because any second now. When her and I were still married, I had mentioned that back probably about 4 years earlier, and I said, "Hey, I think this would be a great career for me." No, not you're not doing it. No, no, no. For 4 years, that's pretty much what it was, and I let it go. Probably after the first 6 months, I'm like, "This would be a great thing," everything else, and nope, I'm not. I'm not going to be the wife of a cop. No, you're not going to do it. No, no, no. Just like moving up to California, no, 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 which is why I stayed in Arizona for so long. And so when the time came, and I came up with my little speech to her, and I said, "Look, you pretty much got two choices. I'm going to take my chances on this career because I'm not doing this over here for the rest of my life." I said, "It's not guaranteed money. We don't have insurance. We don't know what's going to happen down the future, and that's really not a huge difference between that and the law enforcement community either, because you never know what's going to happen. But I say, look, you either stick with me on this whole thing or you walk." And she's like, "All right." And she very extremely reluctantly fought me on it. Said, "Okay, go. I'll go ahead and support you," and she did. So, so that was about April of uh, 97, give or take, when I started training, and I graduated the academy in April of 1998. So it
Wow.
was almost a year to the day that I got the info and then started studying, testing, and everything else. By the time I graduated, it was right at about a year. So,
Wow, that had to be a life change. That had to
well,
be
it
a
was, it was even better. The first time I saw that officer on the street, I said, "Hey, you remember me?" He goes, "Why should I remember you?" And I go, "Hey, remember I did your carpet for you?" And he told me to be a cop. And he goes, "And you actually did it." I go, "Yeah, here I am."
Oh,
So,
wow.
wow. That's
yeah,
so
super.
cool.
And if that weren't enough, his brother happened to be one of our assistant chiefs at the time. And so when I went into the background investigator's office, the brother's name was up on the wall. I said, "Hey, I think I know that guy's brother." And he goes, "How do you know him?" I told him my background guy the entire story. And that was the perfect icebreaker. And after that, it was like, boom, it just kind of all fell into place. So,
Wow.
well,
That's so cool.
That is cool.
Wow.
So you go through this in your book, but let's just go into it just a little bit here. You had a start to your career that a lot of us haven't. Um, you mind telling us how you kind of started your career? And for some of you that don't know, Chris has been involved in some shootings that we'll talk about. But Chris, if you don't mind, just kind of jumping right into a young officer. Here you are, you got your badge and your uniform on, and walk us through that a little bit. What it was like having that, and then from the time you had that first horrific event, um,
yeah.
walk us through that, kind of how that was, how it changed you, and what it was like.
Well, I call it my my first real shooting was actually my second one. So my first one, if you will, barely solo, about a year on, I think, give or take. I'm not even sure. Yeah, I was off probation, which is good. So I'm driving. It's like right out the gate at like 6:05. Briefings, whatever time. I'm out the door. I'm like, yeah, let's go, man. I'm ready to go chase some bad guys. And so I'm driving down the street, and I get flagged down by these guys. And they're like, hey, we've had these dogs that have been chasing us for like 45 minutes. All right, cool, whatever. It's like Saturday, thinking, this is the best I can do. So I'm a dog lover. I've been raised around dogs. I do very well with them. In fact, some reason they tend to gravitate toward me. I don't know why, but whatever. One of their own, I guess. But so I pull up, and these two guys are like sitting on top of their truck. I'm going, well, that looks a little strange. And they're like waving me down. I'm in a marked car, of course, brand new. And the guy's talking to me from the roof of his truck. And I'm like, okay, how bad can this be, right? So get back in the car, get on the radio. I'm like, hey, I'm going to be out here on the scene. I got these two guys. And it's like, yeah, they called 911 like 30 minutes ago. We called rabies. They're not coming. Okay. So, being the young, 10-foot tall, dog handling type guy that I am, I'm like, what? I don't need a backup for this. So I'll just get out there and handle it myself. Okay. Fair enough. So I get out of the car, and I go over to basically where the truck is. It's parked basically on the side of the road, but not on the street. My patrol car is sitting in the street, and there's this female, as it turned out, now I know, female Rottweiler sitting in front of this truck, just sitting on the ground, no big deal. And I go over to, I'm petting her, trying to figure out, okay, what's going on. What I don't know is out of nowhere, off to my right hand side, her suitor, I guess a better word for it, comes out of nowhere and latches onto my gun hand. I'm like, oh, that kind of hurt. So literally has my hand like all the way in his mouth. I still got the scar to this day.
With your gun in your hand, and the dog's got your hand in his mouth.
I had pepper spray in my left hand just in case, trying to be crafty, right? This is the day before tasers. Not that it would have worked anyway. So this dude freaking latched on my gun hand, and I like the reason why I got the scar is because I ripped my hand out of his mouth, like literally,
Wow.
And so I start to back up, and he charges right toward me, and I at the very, very last second move out of the way, and he charges right into the wheel of what ended up being my patrol car. I'm like, oh no. So we're playing like Ring Around the Rosie around my car, and I'm retreating to the back of the car, and I drew out, and he was just coming right at me. About 12 feet away, he started to duck down and lunge like he was going to jump on top of me. Pulled out and fired going around, and basically just killed him mid-step. And after that, I kind of panicked because I tell you what, man, there's no stranger feeling than having your gun out and then pulling the trigger in the middle of a street. That was very strange. It was not anything like being on the range that's where you're expected to do it, right?
Right.
Kind of, again, being brand new, kind of panic mode set in, and I'm going, oh man. So I put it out on the radio. I'm like, 20, whatever my call sign was, 21 Bravo. I'm like, no, I got a 998, and of course that sets everybody off. And then I quickly tell them, hey, it was just a dog, and that slows everybody down. And then I got grief for that for literally the rest of my career.
I bet.
Oh.
I bet. Yeah, I never shot a dog, but I shot the floorboard of my patrol vehicle. So yeah, go ahead.
That's always fun. Yeah. Well, so it sounds bad, and it was to say it this way, but I would rather shoot a person because they know what they're doing. They know, like the other ones we'll talk about when we get to them. The guys that pulled guns on me, I'm like, dude, you kind of knew what you were doing, but a dog doesn't know any better, and being a huge animal lover, I felt incredibly guilty, still feel guilty about having to kill this poor animal just because he's doing what he does.
Mm-hmm.
But the bad part about this whole thing that it could have been was if it wasn't me, what if it was the mom jogging with her kids, or
Right.
kids across the street in the park, playing in the park, and one of these, 150-pound Roddy goes over there and mauls one of these kids. Or it's the rabies animal control person showing up with a freaking snare, and no weapon, trying to control this dog. There's just no way. And so just happened to be, I was the perfect person for that job at the time. And I think about how bad it could have gone, and it didn't. It was still bad. It was still traumatic for me to do that. But, obviously I came out of it in one piece for the most part. So that was my first real deployment with a gun, but my second shooting was actually against a bad guy. So I can surely tell you all about that when you want to hear it. So
Yeah, so the dog incident, that's pretty early on in your career, right? So from the dog shooting, how big of a gap is there between that and your first involved shooting with a person?
that was graduated April 98. Shot the dog in August of 99, and I got my first real shooting in July of 2000. So it's like
Wow.
back to back to back right there. So
Yeah, that's a beginning to a career that a lot of us don't have to go through. I mean, especially in your first year or two, you're still trying to figure out where
Like, get
address,
your bearings.
get your bearings, know where you are, let alone to have to deal with something like that.
yeah,
And you're how old are you at this age?
I got hired on at 27, so I was probably just 29-ish, give or take, something like that. So I think I had actually just bought my first house too, right around the time, because I bought the house in March of '99. So yeah, it was you know 4 or 5 months later when this thing happened. So
Wow.
And you'll find out in Chris's book, but he has a nickname that I feel like there's a few officers that I know that kind of have this nickname. I had it a little bit, but it's we can go ahead and say it on this podcast. But sometimes you're just a shit magnet,
sometimes
Yeah.
and as you're reading through your book, I would agree with that.
I think
You definitely were.
anybody that's
You've
5
had
minutes knows that. So
you've had more happen in your career than a handful of officers have put together. It's just how the cookies crumble sometime. It's not like you went out looking for it, but certain things happen to certain people. And you, sir, have been tested your whole career. And so let's go ahead and walk us through from that first incident to that where you got your first involved shooting. What's young Chris thinking about? What's going on that first call?
well, I tell you, early on in my career, my FTO, he taught me how to hunt. He didn't really teach me how to investigate that well, but I was a hunter as it turned out, and I didn't have any idea. And so I was smart enough to realize that with that came the possibility of, if I'm going to be a hunter, I've got to be prepared to clean the prey, if you will, on some level. And so what I started doing was thinking about, and this is part of where the title of the book came from. When that day comes, I better be prepared for it. And so what I started doing was playing the what if game. And that's literally, I'm not kidding, what saved my life on that dog thing, because I had 3 other incidents where I could have shot a dog and didn't, and then that one came and then I did. And it was no different when this bad guy came along, because I had role played it multiple times, like on a daily basis in my mind of what could happen, what am I going to do, where's my escape route, visualizing the win, all these things that we got to process through. And when it came time to pull the trigger, I had already processed through all these things over here, and I went straight to where I needed to be. And again, that's what saved my life on that one. It was incredibly hairy, as it turns out, but I acted probably as best as I could, especially based on the experience that I had at that point, which was minimal, 2 years on. So,
Man.
Wow.
but
And you, just so people know, Chris and I have talked ahead of time. He's allowed me permission to ask any questions I like. Is that correct?
Absolutely, please do.
All right. I want our listeners to know that sometimes when I ask questions, I don't want our listeners to be like, "Whoa, why would he do that? That was a jerk move to ask him that." But
Yeah.
Just open book all the way. So,
all right. So that's what I love about your book is it's not just storytelling. It's also equipping first responders, because like we talked about, it's about being prepared when that call comes. And in his book, that's what's so cool about it is especially for a young first responder to pick it up and read it. It doesn't just tell stories; it gives you tools. So he may talk about an incident that he had, but then he talks about the tools that a young person should have going into that and preparing yourself for it. And that's what I love about his book is it's more than just a storytelling. It's kind of a map to help people to get prepared for these things, because when we're in the academy and we're going through this training, we know that we're probably going to have to, we know that we may have to take somebody's life, but you don't really understand that you're actually going to have that opportunity may present itself, and you have to be ready. And so that's what I love about your book, Chris. So sorry I went off on a little side note there, but in your book, let's go ahead and talk about that chapter.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that day.
So that one, that was a weird thing because I had my very first civilian ride along, a buddy of mine riding with me that day, and it's one of those things where it's like, let's not even waste any time getting gas for the car. Let's just go, man. So we did. And, so the beginning of the day started off really slow. We ended up with some really stupid arrest, whatever it was, or some kind of a warrant or something like that. So we drove down to jail, and I missed out on another really big scene up in the area that we worked at. And that's a whole other long conversation. But the funny note to that part of the whole thing was my friend who got involved with that thing said, hey, you missed me in action the first time I was able to get into something, kind of thing. And I said, and I typed her a message back on the computer saying, no, don't worry, the big one's coming later, dot, dot, dot. And that statement almost cost me a session in timeout, as it turns out.
Wow.
So fast forward, it's about 11 o'clock in the morning. This is, I don't even remember what day of the week it was. It doesn't make any difference, but over in another part of the city, an officer got involved in a pretty gnarly pursuit. And it got so dangerous that he just called it off within probably the first 3 or 4 minutes. He said, yeah, this is getting stupid. So the guy keeps on going. And I'm sure that the other precinct probably notified us that, hey, this guy could be coming our direction, which, of course, you don't pay any attention to because, I mean, it's a big city, 4 million people or whatever it was at the time. And so, sure enough, we start getting these emergency calls. Hey, we got a hit and run over here. Hey, we got another hit and run over here. And then for the third one, we got another hit and run over here. Same vehicle description on each one of them. And for me, I just hated doing accidents. I'm like, no, we're not going to go anywhere near that. That's not my thing, right? Because I knew that, first of all, I failed in accident investigation, accident reconstruction. I could never do it. I got teased constantly about it, so I said, I don't want any part of that. And so we're at Circle K, which is like a local convenience store, and literally half mile away, hot call comes out, emergency call, and basically what happens is there's a semi coming north making a big U-turn to get back on the freeway, and this guy's barreling down the road at who knows what kind of speed he was going, literally plants his car under the semi of this trailer, or under the trailer of the semi. I'm like, holy cow. And when I went back to look at the car later, I go, how did this guy even get out of that car?
Wow.
There was like no room whatsoever. And clearly he was desperado to be able to make it out of there. So he does. So that's the call that I pretty much hear come across the radio. And I'm like, well, we're really close. I probably should just switch over at least and listen. So we did. And then the second repeater call that comes back out says, hey, this guy was last seen running through the neighborhood with a gun. Now that's Chris Horner, man. I'm all over that. Yeah, we can go for that one. So, right. So I fly down the access road and I see all this commotion going on, and I see the car. It's all smoking and steaming, and truck drivers all going, I don't even know what happened. And all these people are like, he ran eastbound. I'm like, okay. And they're like, hey, he's got a gun. Okay, all right, calm down. Let me put my cape on, right? I'll be all right. So, I got my buddy riding in the car with me. And so we shoot across the freeway. We get onto the other side. It's basically an industrial area. So you got a couple of little restaurants, like a bank, and then behind there to the next driveway over is like one huge 2-story brick building that goes from one end of the parking lot to the other. Really, really big building. Well, behind there is just one little road that goes in between the next set of buildings, which is pretty much the exact same thing. So it's all industrial area. So we pull up, and the last time radio had heard from me, I'm like, hey, I'm on scene. I think the guy took off running eastbound. We're going to go take a look. And that was the last transmission that they got from me. Get over to the area, park the car, get out, and just slightly behind me to my west, if you will, parked facing eastbound, slightly west of me. I'm looking around the buildings, and I'm not seeing what I want to see, just looking for anything suspicious, whatever else. And all of a sudden, this guy starts yelling. He comes out of his store. He goes, hey, he ran through my store. Okay, so we go in, and as it turned out, it's a perfect situation because the door from the front led directly straight to the door to the back. So I could see right through the entire business. And of course, I'm brand new, I'm young, I'm on fire. I'm like, yeah, we got this under control, and nobody knows where I'm at. I'm not calling for backup. And of course, everybody's coming now that they know this guy's running with a gun. So I go running through the thing, and I see this guy standing about I'll say probably about 10 or 12 feet outside the back door, give or take. And he's matching the description. And I'm like, oh, here we go. Brian Urlacher, here it comes, man. I'm just going to freaking dump this guy. And as soon as I get out the door, I hear this lady screaming again back to my east. And she's like, hey, he's in my car. He's in my car, like screaming hysterically. I'm going, well, apparently this isn't my guy. So I bypass him and I go probably about 50 yards down the way. And there's, sure enough, there's this guy, and it's our bad guy. He matches the description to a T. And he's sitting in this, it's a Cadillac. It's an older style, like early 90s Cadillac. And he's got what looked to me about a 3-inch or a 3-foot throwing knife. It ended up being like 8 inches, which whatever.
Yeah.
You know, you're looking at it like this, you know, like through
Yeah.
peep sights. And so I see the guy, and basically he's parked right up against the building, and there's another car parked right next to him. So, you know, being the hero that I am, I go, you know, I'm like, well, let me process through this. I remember playing that what if game. It's like, well, I don't have my car. I can't block him in. I know that he's armed with at least a gun. So according to the radio traffic, nobody knows where I'm at. So what are my options here? So I go walk up between the two cars. I got my gun out, of course. By this time, I'm at least that smart. So, and I'm giving the guy commands. Now it's exactly 11:53 in the morning, July 15th of 2000. So whatever day of the week that was, I don't know. But I go up there and I start giving him commands. I'm like, you know, get out of the car, get out of the car. And he's looking right at me. I'm in uniform. It's broad daylight. There's no way he doesn't see me. And the window's down, you know, like an inch or so he can hear me clearly, as clear as day. So I'm like, well, I don't want to stay down range too long. So I retreat to the back of the car again, go back up for the second time, start giving him commands. I'm like, get out of the car, get out of the car. And clearly he's just like, whatever, dude, I'm not doing it. And he's got that throwing knife in his left hand, and he's smashing the column of this car, because those older style GM cars, you can pop that ignition. If you get that plastic housing out from around that steering column, you can actually start the car with your finger. And he knows this. He's a car thief. The other car that he was driving was stolen too, by the way. And if that weren't enough, he was wanted for 3 felony warrants for pulling the guy that trained me a year before. So he was a bad dude. There was no question about it. And so,
wow. So other than that, he was a good guy.
for that,
Jeez.
oh, by the way,
my goodness.
the gun he had was also stolen, which, you know, that's another story. So,
Dang.
so I go back up to the car now for the second time, and I'm very quickly realizing that, well, I can't just open the door, right? That's just not going to work, because this guy's twice my size. I know he's armed with a knife in his hand, probably a gun on the seat, and that's just a suicide mission right there. So I'm like, well, what else can I do? And I would like to think that I was forward thinking, and I'm not going to try to lie and say that I was. But since I had role played this scenario 100 times before, except for this one, I've done every other thing you could possibly think of except for this one. So instead of starting from like 50, I started from 0 and went from 0 to 100 like 2 seconds. I mean, that's all it took to figure this out. So I get up there and I start kicking the window of the car. And I'm thinking, well, this is the only thing I could think of to get this guy's attention, you know, to maybe distract him somehow, maybe show him that I'm not messing around, right? I'm the cop.
Right.
You're going to do what I say. The guy's got a freaking stolen car, stolen gun, stolen whatever. He's got 3 felony warrants. Do you think he's going to listen to this little skinny little freaking brat over here pointing a gun at him? No.
Right.
But I was thinking, yeah, I'll handle this. So I start kicking the window of the car, and it doesn't work the first time. Go back, retreat, and go back up for the second kick. Kick it again with my left foot, because I had the stop process. I don't want to shoot myself in the toe. God forbid he pulls a gun and I end up having to open fire at the same time. That was my thought process. Doesn't work. Try number 2. Attempt number 3, I go back up and I realize now the car is actually starting to crank. He can't quite get his finger in there because he's got such, you know, he's got huge hands. He can't quite get his finger in there, but I can hear the car starting to crank just slightly. And I'm like, oh no, this guy's going to be out of here in no time. So I lean back on the car behind me. I use my right foot and I kick the window for attempt number 3, which shattered the window. Which, had I planned it out, would have been a great, perfect plan. That's not what really happened. But ultimately, what it did was it caused a great distraction, because when the glass shattered, instinctively, of course, he goes like this to block his face from the glass collapsing on top of him. He throws the knife on the floor and he reaches down and gets the gun just about to head level. And I see it, of course, and I open fire, fired 2 rounds. My first round actually hit him in the arm, straight through his arm bone, into his heart, and then collapsed down below his heart. And then the second round actually went into the door of the car, and I got some grief for that one too, which is another part of the ending story. And so that's where the fear started to really kick in, because now I've just opened fire on this guy, right? And he slumps over on the front seat of this bench seat car, and of course I put it out on the radio, and now the troops are coming for me. And one of my closest friends, still to this day, comes running out the same door that I came out of, 50 yards down the way. My civilian buddy, by the way, is down the way doing traffic control, and later on he told me, he goes, dude, that was so loud, I can't believe it, because I'm in between two buildings. And of course they asked me, how many shots did you fire? And I said, I have no idea. Well, what did you hear? I said, I didn't hear a thing. I mean, nothing, which we'll talk about as we go along. And so there was a sergeant in training at the time that showed up on the scene. He comes in, blocks in the car with his patrol car, gets out, what do you got? And I said, hey, I shot the guy. I don't know if he's still alive. He's playing possum on me or what. Because, as a rookie, you're thinking, the guy's going to fly across the parking lot. There's going to be all kinds of explosions and all this crazy stuff going on. Nothing like that whatsoever. He had a tiny little trickle of blood on his arm, and that was it. I'm like, wow, okay. Which now I understand the dynamic of what that actually is. So the guy slumped over in the car. So he tells my buddy Joel, he goes, all right, hey, you stay on this side of the car. He goes, Hoyer, you come with me. We go around to the passenger side. And before he opens the door, he goes, this is what he says to me. And this was the first of 2 times in my career that I was terrified. He goes, all right, here's what we're going to do. He goes, I'm going to open the door. You train your gun on his back. If he moves, lifts his head, turns a finger, whatever else, shoot him in the back. And I'm like, okay. And now it's like one of those things where my hands are starting to tremble, because now it's not reactionary anymore. Now I've got to actually think, right? I'm like, I don't like this anymore, And so I'm sitting there with the muzzle of my issued Glock 22, my 40 caliber, sitting on his back, just waiting for him. And I'm like, please God, don't move, because I don't want to do this again, kind of a thing. Well, this sergeant in training, who's just a stud, he leans down, the guy's face right here on the seat. He leans down under the seat, grabs the guy's gun, grabs the guy's knife, hands him to me when I go and secure him. By the time I get back, they are now starting to pull the guy out of the car. And when they pull him out of the car, remember Phoenix, it's 108 degrees or 109 degrees that particular day. It's 12 o'clock now, give or take. And on the ground he goes, with resulting in 3rd-degree burns on his back, which I'm like, oh, sorry, bro. I mean, you shouldn't have pulled the gun on me, but whatever.
Right.
Where the learning curve really kicked in, because now I've got to give this dude CPR. I'm like, wait a second. You did all these things. And of course, I didn't know most of the other stuff. I didn't know anything about the other crimes that he'd already committed. But now I know that you pulled a gun on me, and now I got to try to save your life. What is that? I mean,
right.
We're told that, but do we really remember that kind of stuff? Probably not.
No.
Until you're in the middle of it, then you're like, whoa, yeah, I forgot about that part. So very fortunately, I had another buddy of mine. He goes, hey, dude, we got this under control. You don't need to be here. They whisked me off the scene, and that was pretty much the end of the initial part. Of course, they get the guy secured, they call fire transports him. He's pretty much dead on the scene. I mean, that first shot was all it took to put him down, which was, again, not one of those things where I planned for. I was like, kind of, like screaming.
You were trying to survive.
Yeah,
you were trying to survive.
This whole front sight, squeeze the trigger smoothly and all this kind of. Yeah, that wasn't the case. So, but anyway,
Man.
Long story short, that's pretty much what happened on that one. So, all right, fire away.
All right, you got any questions?
I
All right,
do.
go ahead.
Okay, so so I have not got the opportunity to read your book yet, so I apologize if I ask redundant questions, but I know.
Not at all.
But that's that's the next one I'm diving into, so I'm very excited. But I'm curious because you talked about, how you'd played through these what if scenarios and, mentally gone through these things so many times. And that's what you guys train for too, is, to prepare for stuff like this. And so I'm curious what happened after that, how you were how you felt emotionally, mentally, how you got through that after that situation.
Well, that's a fascinating question, and that's a very valid question as well. Just for the purposes of, let me remind you guys, if I sound like I'm really very candid about this and I'm acting like I'm not emotional, that's not it at all. You got to remember, this was 19 or 23 years ago now, give or take. It's not like I have,
Right.
not processed through it all, but
Hmm.
the simplest way for me to answer that question was it was a decision that he made that I responded to. It's like you
Yeah.
knew what I was there for. You knew that you're a
Yeah.
criminal. You knew all these things, and you still tried to. And I said it this way. That sounds really bad. When I got asked in the investigative question part of it all, well, what do you think? And I go, well, he messed with the wrong guy. You took a chance and you tried to do something you couldn't have done, you shouldn't have done, and you lost. And I
Hmm.
will
Hmm.
never ever feel bad about that for 1 second, because if he wins, what happens? I go home in a freaking coffin, right? Or I don't go
Yep.
at
Yeah.
all. And at the time, um, my daughter was 7 or 8,
Mm.
and I'm like, I can't leave
Yeah.
her behind. Even though my crazy ex, I didn't want to leave her behind either. Now it'd be something different, but whatever, that's another story. But that was pretty much it. I never really had any
Yeah.
any ill feelings about it, and I wasn't one of those guys. I'm like walking around going, "Yeah, man, look at me, look at that, I just killed a guy." And that was never it for me either, because it was more on the side of, for me, it was just thank God I survived that, and now how do I take it to
Yeah.
the next level to make sure that if I got to go through this again, how am I going to survive the next one? That's where my thought process started.
Yeah.
Right.
And thank you for sharing that though, because I do want to say this is like we also don't come from a place where we want first responders to struggle with every situation. You know what I mean? Like I do like that you were able to, you know, come at that situation with like logic and reason and emotion too. I'm not saying that that wasn't involved in it, but I mean, you were right. You had to, I mean, you responded the way that you had to, and like you said, if you wouldn't have handled it the way that you did and then you didn't go home, that's definitely not a good scenario. You know what I mean? And so um yeah, I'm glad to hear though that did you were able to factor in, I guess, the weight of what you needed to do and that you made the right decision, you know?
And it really wasn't a hard choice. And this is what I tell people all the time. That decision to pull the trigger was the biggest decision I ever had to make in the shortest amount
Mhm.
of time. However,
Yeah.
Hmm.
knowing what I know, especially even then, was if I'm trained properly and I do the right thing and I make the right decisions, pulling that trigger is going to be the right choice. You will know it when the time comes, and you'll also
Yeah.
know when not to pull the trigger as well, which is why we train so hard. It has to be that way, and that really truly is the easy part. Just pulling the trigger. I mean, I'm a trained monkey. I can do that all day long. It's no big deal. How do you deal
Right.
with all the aftermath of everything else?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
how was I've talked to quite a few officers, but let's talk about your experience when that happened. You get whisked away, and what's going through your mind at this time? How was it for you? And the reason why I ask is it seems like most people I ask that had gone through a shooting, um, they I'm losing my train of thought. I'm sorry.
I think I might know what you're
Go ahead.
referring to. So, okay, so I've heard scenarios where, somebody goes through a situation similar to yours, and they were treated very much like they did something bad or wrong, and they felt
Yeah.
very accused and not supported, I guess, for making that right decision, the decision that they needed to make.
Right. That's
Right. So some of our listeners, they may have to make this decision someday, and when they have to make that decision, yeah. What what was what you were saying? I'm sorry. I'm losing my train of thought again.
Well, because you'd mentioned that they were like, "Hey, we got this. You don't have to like." You kind of went off to a different place. I'm curious, I guess, what interactions, even within your department, happened after that.
I was
Yeah. That's there you go. Thank you.
yeah, I was
That's
very
what.
fortunate that I had a very supportive agency. Which once we get to that point, which I don't know if we're going to get to
Good.
today or not, but that wasn't always the case. And what I've found is that
Mm.
Yeah.
most investigators that have either just quote unquote been there or they have seen this enough times have a better understanding of like physically what's going on with that officer immediately after this thing happens. And it sounds really arrogant to say it this way, but a
Mhm.
lot of these times, if you haven't been there, done that, it's not that I don't want to hear your advice, whatever else, but you know, you need to like walk, gently around certain topics with guys, especially with a young kid like I was that had never been through this before. And I'm like, and I was so incredibly blessed to have the lieutenant that was out there running the scene. When I asked him the question, I said, "LT, this is, I'm brand new. This is my first shooting." I go, "What do you think?" And his actual response was, "Yeah, looks good." you know. And now I know what he was doing was just setting my mind at ease.
Mhm.
And then after he goes, "Did you do this? Yeah. Did you do this? Yeah. Did you do this?
Right.
You go
Yeah.
to that use of force continuum. Did you do everything you could have done?" Yeah. He goes, "This is the perfect scenario." He goes, "Except for that one shot that you put in the door of the car," which of course, again, he's kind of making light of it because that's what we do. And he set my mind at ease.
Right.
You are 100% good. You don't have a thing to worry about. And I'm like, "Oh, thank God," you know, because I mean, it's one of those things
Mhm.
where
Yeah. So
you hear about the aftermath, like the lawsuits, and they're going to come after you, and you're going to have all these other problems, and you end
right.
up an alcoholic, and it's like, okay. So from the very, very beginning, I was very well taken care of, and it didn't stop there. I mean, it continued on, luckily enough for me. So, which unfortunately is not always the case for.
Thank goodness.
Good. Yeah.
Right. And that's what I was trying to say earlier is like when an officer has to make a decision, the first thing they're going to think once they make that decision is, oh crap, what's going to happen? So if we
Yeah.
can prepare them and equip them ahead of time, then we don't have to restore them later, if that
Exactly.
makes
Not only
sense.
that,
Um,
I talk very much about the no hesitation too, because if you hesitate thinking you're going to get jammed up, first of all, you're never going to survive that career, and there's a high probability you're going to get yourself or somebody else hurt if you hesitate. So that's my opinion. So
Yeah.
so once you got pulled away from the scene, then they take you to did they take you to the PD and interview you there? What did you have to go through if
yeah,
nobody's
I mean,
listeners never had to gone through it?
so basically what happened was that particular time. So again, this was back in 2000. So what they did was my sergeant at the time, luckily, she was super squared away. Um, they pulled me aside and they take me over to Denny's across the freeway, and I'm not kidding. I probably drank about a gallon of water in about 5 minutes. I'm like, because I was, out of the adrenaline, which is a huge
Oh
thing.
yeah.
Um, and I didn't understand. And luckily, she hadn't been through it herself before, but she had been around a handful of guys that had. And so I started asking. I'm like, "Oh my god, my fingers are like all crazy, it's like crazy numb. My toes, everything else." She goes, "Well, what happens
Wow.
is when you go through a major critical incident, all the blood from your fingers and your toes and all that goes to your heart to protect your heart." I'm like, "Oh, I
Yeah.
didn't know that." So when you
Wow.
start to calm down and the adrenaline starts to wear off, they all start to wake back up again. I'm like, "Oh, great, who knew, right?" Um, so I was in there nervous as hell because this is before the investigation actually starts. They pull me from the scene, take me to the Denny's, and I'm just sitting over there and I'm just drinking water. And she's getting information, and I can hear basically what she's saying to whoever it is on the phone, but I can't hear what they're saying to her. And it was kind of funny because she was a little bit tentative because she wasn't sure her first time as a sergeant having an officer get involved in a shooting. And so she's like, "Well, we found out the car was stolen. We found out that the gun was stolen. We found out that he's got 3 felony warrants." And she kind of tiptoed around for several seconds. She goes, "And the guy, he's in our code for dead person is 901H." So she's like, "And yeah, he's 901H," and kind of like asking me the question, and I go, "Okay." I go, "I don't have a problem with it." Again, I'm sitting here. I'm able to have this conversation because I did what I had to do to survive it.
Right.
Mhm.
You're
So
still
I
in
know.
survival mode at that point, I imagine. You at that point,
Oh,
I don't want to say you felt victory, but you're happy to be alive.
I was very happy to be alive. And
Yeah.
I didn't have like my life flash before my eyes, but I was thinking about a lot of stuff. I'm like, man, did I tell my daughter I loved her that morning? Did I do these things that I should have been doing? Did I miss out on something that, now that I'm no longer here, is that going to be something that's going to be a big factor and big problem for later on for the family? And I'm like, oh man, all these things now that I didn't learn this right then, but it took me a couple of more years to figure out that I never ever ever used the words I should have. You know,
Mm.
that's like my gospel. I'm like, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. That way, I don't have to ever look back and regret the things that I should have done. No, do it.
I love that. Yeah, you don't wanna
Yeah.
just shit all over yourself, do you?
No way.
Don't shit
No,
all over yourself, Chris. Nobody likes when we shit all over ourselves.
not in the least. So yeah,
Very
and also the things I took
unappealing.
away from that. So, but I never had any. I never had any bad dreams. I never had any problems, except for the media, which is a whole another conversation. Where the
Mm.
media came in and basically said, in so many words, literally, this is not so many words. They said, "Well, Officer Hoyer came in and executed this Mexican national."
Oh
Wow.
my.
Okay, well, I didn't execute the guy. He pulled a gun. And I defended myself, and he wasn't a Mexican national. He was an Aryan Brotherhood guy. I'm like, but thanks for throwing that out there to the freaking MAs. I think I killed one of theirs.
Oh
And
my
now,
gosh.
of course, the ABs are like, oh, you killed one of our own, which never materialized to anything. But that's another one of those things that weighs on your mind. You're like, oh, great. Here's my stupid mug plastered all over the news for 3 straight days. You know, officer involved shooting, officer involved shooting, officer involved shooting.
Yeah.
And it kept saying the same thing over and over. And I'm going, hey, that's not what it was, man. I mean, come on. You guys weren't even there, and you're telling me what you think happened. And I was very angry about that. I was like, all right. But that's just one of those things you just process through. And if you need to do follow up and do an investigation or whatever it is, call the news station or have your boss do it and go, hey, dude, you guys are false reporting information. Knock it off. But
Right.
I was just gonna ask, are you just basically at the mercy of whatever they say or what happens? Like, how does that get handled?
With the media?
Yeah.
I had basically no recourse whatsoever. It's like, and not only that, it really, I mean, it sounds really bad to say it this way. It makes no difference because once it's out there, they're not going to change
Right.
their mind. When they find out the truth, it's too late by that point. They're not going to change
Yeah.
their mind or what they believe. You know,
Right.
even with
Damages.
investigation, when they come back and they actually read it, they go, well, this is what we heard the first time. This is what we really believe.
Mm.
Okay, whatever. And this is just our community, unfortunately, we got to put up with. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
You
say we,
represent.
like I'm still in it. I understand since I'm no longer there, it's easy for me to point and go, "Oh, this is what you guys need to be doing." I acknowledge that. That's not it at all. Believe me. So,
Oh, I get it.
anyways,
Man, thanks for sharing that. And we'll dive into that more into the next episode. Not
Okay.
necessarily that call, but the aftermath that led to Chris doing what he's doing today. But let's go ahead and close out this episode because we've gone on a little bit longer. Sorry about that, everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, if you want to close this out, and next week's episode is going to be part 2 with Chris Hoyer, and there may be a part after that. I'm not quite sure yet. We're just gonna
See how it goes.
see how it goes.
sure there will.
But Chris, thank you for joining us for this episode, and my wife will close us out, and we're excited to sit down with you next week to talk to you.
If
All right. Well, thank you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
if anybody wants to reach out to me, you guys are more than welcome to drop my email in the chat box or however you want to do it. So,
Oh,
Yes.
perfect. That's good to know. We'll be sure to include Chris's email in the description for this episode and all the different platforms, as well as the title of his book. And we can include a link of
Yep.
how they can get to it. So this has been Chris Hoyer. Thank you so much for spending time with us, and we'll catch everybody in the next episode. And please stay tuned to next week to give it a listen. We'll be back with Chris.